Welcome to the first episode. I guess it's an episode. The first installment of comics you probably aren't reading but should be. I am your host, Jason, and I am coming to you from Galactic Quest, a comic book store in Lawrenceville and Buford, Georgia, which are more or less suburbs of Gainesville / Atlanta, near the Mall of Georgia. If you happen to be in the neighborhood after the world stops ending, you come on by and check us out. We sell a lot of comic books, obviously. That's our primary business. But we don't sell enough of the books that I'm going to talk about. We do tend to sell out of these titles when they come in, because they're very good, but not enough people know about these books, and I think more people should. I also think that you would, if you checked them out, like these. If you have kind of a wider taste, if you're mostly into superheroes, then some of these books might not be your cup of tea, but if you just like a good comic experience in general, I think you would enjoy the books that I'll recommend. The first book in our series, let me do some switching. And I'm not a very professional videographer or producer type person, so I'm going to be doing a lot of looking away from the camera because I have to also operate these controls, and I'm working on a laptop right here, so I don't have multiple screens and the option to set up controls on another panel, so I'm always having to look down. So anyway, please forgive that. This first episode, we're going to talk about the most excellent series from Boom Studios called Folklords. And before we get into that discussion, I'm going to show you one thing here. If I can launch this. The trailer. The official trailer. So there we have the trailer. Pretty nice little piece. It shows you a few of the underlying concepts of this first group of issues. And in the photo here are the first 5. And so far we're paused at 5. I think 6, I don't remember when it's scheduled to come out, but 6 will begin another story arc. The first book was already in multiple printings by the time it hit the shelves. We sold out of it. Every copy we had. We sold out of all the reprints that we got. And the remaining 5 issues have sold pretty well. I think the Buford location has maybe 2 or 3 stray copies of some of the later issues. But we sold through this run. And it was good. I enjoyed this story and the art as well. And the overall production of this is good. Let me get some stats here. Well, I say stats, just the basics. It is from Boom Studios. If you're not familiar with Boom Studios, these guys have been killing it all year. Virtually every series that they have dropped in the last at least calendar year has been excellent. It's just been really entertaining, very high quality art. Even the stock quality, the production of the book itself, the physical product, has been excellent. This Folklords has very nice paper quality, very nice graphic design. They do really cool things for retailers who support their company. They have what they call thank you variants that they send out. So if you're lucky enough to get those, they usually are 1 or 2 per store only. A lot of cool variant covers for their number ones. And just overall, really fun, really creative, good work coming out of that studio. Folklords was written by Matt Kent. The art was produced by Matt Smith. The colorist for the series is Chris O'Halloran. And the series letterer, I don't often mention letterers because a lot of times they're just doing boilerplate grunt work. I mean, it's sad to say. Sometimes there's high concept lettering, typography. And in this case, Jim Campbell, the letterer, has done a very good job. The lettering is very good in this issue, in this series. And it's worth noting, as you read this, pay attention to letters in this book, because he uses typography and lettering style to communicate more than just the words being said. So it's good work. And then in this series, our primary character, protagonist, is Ansel. He's a young man. He's got an elven. Ansel's a human. Archer is an elven friend of his who's kind of a backstabber, jerk type, bad, not the best friend. Maybe he'll get better. Maybe what he's been doing has a purpose. Who knows? And then he's got a love interest who he calls D. I guess that's her. Could be her nickname. I don't recall. And I read all 5 of these, but I don't remember if he ever. Does he ever? Anyway, you'll see if you read it. But she's got a longer name than D, but he calls her D in issue 1. And the premise is that Ansel is kind of an oddball in a lot of ways. He's sort of a parallel to what you'd call a LARPer or an over-the-top cosplayer in our reality, one that's kind of very into the fantasy. And so what you see on the front cover of issue 1 is Ansel dressed in a suit and tie, like someone from our world, in the midst of what is a medieval high fantasy environment. And so what you can get from that is that Ansel is dressed as a fantasy character in his world. In our world, we fantasize about fantastic creatures and magical lands. And in his world, he fantasizes about skyscrapers and city streets and people who dress like that and have gadgets. And so he has clothes like that. He makes gadgets that are functional like ours. He's got watches and lighters and other common objects that earth type normal people would have. But in his world, those are all fantasy objects. He doesn't go around dressed like this. It has a specific purpose. He calls it his questing suit. And he is coming of age at the age of 18. And everyone in his culture, when they become 18, they go before their assembled villagers and they say, my quest will be this. And they each have a quest that they go on, and that's a rite of passage into adulthood for them. So Ansel has a quest, and all his friends have their quests, and they have to go into this quest ceremony and declare publicly what their quest will be, and then set off on it. So he's created this suit, and he's put it on. He's very excited, and his big quest idea is to find the Folklords. And the Folklords are legendary figures in their world, and it's a taboo to speak of them or really pursue any kind of information about them. We don't know why it's taboo, but it's a very no sort of thing. And when he tells his friends that he's going to declare this as his quest, they all think he's a nut. You know, they already thought he was weird for wearing that suit, but then they thought he was super crazy for actually saying out loud that he wanted to find the Folklords. They said they're going to throw you in jail for that. You know, you can't go up in public and say that's what you're going to do. But he's defiant. He's going to do it anyway. Unfortunately, he ends up running late to his ceremony. He gets there just in the nick of time. He's last in line. And right before him is his little friend Archer, the elf. And Archer gets up and steals his thunder. He declares that he's going to find the Folklords. So as rude and dickish as that is, it at least does Ansel the favor of seeing what happens when somebody gets in front of the town and says that very thing. The authorities crack down immediately. And you learn that these strange cloaked figures that you see around town are called librarians. They are the authority figures. It's sort of like almost a theocracy, except for it's more of a literocracy, I guess you would say. They are the stewards and guardians of information, and particularly forbidden information. And so when Archer gets up and says, "I'm going to find the Folklords," they literally grab him up by his neck. They shut down the whole ceremony. They tell everyone that there will be no quests this year. No one can leave the territory at all. And so they then threaten, dire consequences for this, for pursuit of forbidden knowledge. And so there's a death sentence, basically, if Ansel were to pursue his quest, they'll kill him. But he's still not deterred. He's sort of mad at Archer for screwing him over like that, but at the same time, he looks at Archer as now a partner in crime, adopts him as a co-quester. So now they're both on the same quest to find the Folklords, and they decide they're going to sneak out of the village and do the quest anyway, which is a bad idea, but they do it. And they are immediately blocked by an armed librarian just across the river as they're trying to escape, and they're a little bit worried, but for some weird reason, this librarian doesn't stop them. He lets them go right on through. And they think that there's something off about him, and as it turns out, there is, and you find out what later on. But he's sort of a rogue librarian, and that's one of the first characters that you meet, other than the friends in the city. Another person who has opposed Ansel at the beginning of his quest was his girlfriend, Dee. She gives him a lot of grief for his idea for a quest, and he takes that personally. There's a bit of a writing oddity there, but I can't really talk about it right now because I would spoil a major event later. But she overreacts to his rebuke of her resistance, and I don't really understand why she overreacted based on what you find out later on in the story. But anyway, that's a question for some other day. The main gist of it is they do succeed in leaving the village. They immediately decide to go into the enchanted forest, and they immediately encounter a variety of denizens of the forest, including a girl named Ugly. And she is sort of like what is she? Like a warrior. She's a pretty tough chick. Has spent her life thinking that she was cursed. Like if she would kiss the right prince, she would now be beautiful, type of thing. So she sets upon passers-by and forces them to kiss her. So she'll be transformed into the beautiful princess or whatever that she's supposed to be. It doesn't seem to work. It has never worked, but she does it anyway. And she kind of sort of got used to being just this ugly beast. She's not that ugly, but she's kind of mannish, you know what I mean? Like, but she, instead of, recoiling from the world, she now just becomes this sort of adventurer, and so she's pretty badass. And she ends up, first of all, Archer thinks everybody's a threat, so when they first encounter Ugly, Archer hits her in the head with a slingshot and takes off running or something. But then Archer is a peacemaker, and he's trying to make allies, and so eventually they become buddies. Another thing that he does is he finds a damsel in distress in the middle of the forest, and she's upset she can't find her brother. So he's like, well, I will help you on your quest, because he's trying to be the noble adventurer, or the noble whatever knight in shining armor for this damsel. And she agrees to accompany him, and they eventually find this gingerbread cottage in the woods. And so they're like, well, let's check this out. And what he doesn't realize that she's just setting him up, and she's duped him into thinking she's in trouble in order to lead him to this place, in order to capture him, torture him, kill him, eat him, and make him into a tree. And that's sort of where the party coalesces, to use adventurer speak, because the Ugly shows back up at this point and helps him out of a tight spot. And then they proceed onward based on some evidence that they find in the cottage, and so it gets on to toward the conclusion of the arc in issue 5. And that's where I think that I'm not really ruining much about this story by telling you these details, because these first 5 issues are mostly a setup for the whole rest of the story, because it really gets good at issue 5, and the conclusion at issue 5 is just okay, I see, kind of the reveal of the bigger picture. And I won't tell you much more about the plot, and I have left out quite a lot, so don't worry, I haven't really spoiled it for you by telling you what I've told you. But these first 5 issues are really setting the stage for something bigger, which I think, that makes issue 6 a pretty good jumping on point if you can't track down the first 5, or don't want to track down the first 5. You can at least plan to get on board with this series at issue 6 when it comes out. Let me find, I had some other samples of artwork here. This is the back cover. Just to show you some of the graphic design and the typography, it's really nice work. On the back of each cover of these issues is Ansel's known world. It's a little map, hand drawn, I guess. Well, obviously hand drawn by someone, but maybe it's Ansel's drawing. I'm not sure. But with each successive issue, the world expands, and so you see progressively as he adventures, he learns more and more about the world outside of his village, and so the map updates and changes cover to cover. I thought that was a really nice touch, so I included that here. This is an example of the interiors. The style is perfect for this story. It's not too cartoony, but it's not like hyper fantasy, hyper realism. It's not trying to be too realistic, and the faces are simple, but they're, as you can see, adequate to express complex emotion. So it's a good job. Color is also pretty good. It's kind of on the saturated side, but it's nice. It's not like over chromatic either. It's nice and neutralized, typical of a medieval reality. So it's good. It's a good concept for color. And let's see, another page. This is one of the scenes with the Hansel and Gretel. And again, I say Hansel and Gretel. A lot of these Enchanted Forest people seem to be based on Germanic folklore or European folklore. I can't say one way or another if it's going to be more diverse and more global than that, or if this world is mostly the result of Western civilization's fantasies. But anyway, this is a scene inside the the gingerbread house, and you've got the Hans. I think it was his name was Hans. I should have reread the issue before I started talking about it. And this is issue 3, I think, a page from issue 3. He has been mutated into a monster somehow. I won't explain how there, because they show it in the book, and it's kind of interesting. Meanwhile, the Gretel character, whose name is Greta here, is a cannibal, and then you see he's got a drill in his hand. He's about to torture Ansel with a drill, and they're forcing him to eat this seed. And that seed grows into a big tree. If they kill him and bury him, he'll grow into a tree. So that's their general psychotic plan, is to capture people, torture them, eat them, put a seed down their throat, bury them. They grow into a big tree in the forest. But that power tool is interesting because it doesn't fit. It's sort of like Ansel with his watch. It's not a fantasy world object that they would normally have. This guy figured out how to build a drill and how to use it to torture people, and he did that from information he learned in a forbidden book, which he somehow got his hands on, which was a book from our world, more or less, that's about torture and the implements used in torture. So he saw all these devices in there, and he built one, or probably a bunch of them, to abuse people with. And that's the clue that they find in this cabin, in the gingerbread house. They find this book, and it has a label in it that it belongs to a certain library. So then they head to that library. But that's just a really cool concept. Our world is negatively influencing their world as a form of sort of intellectual pollution, and it could be vice versa. What happens on the other side, we don't know yet, but that's kind of the way it's heading. So that's the overview of Folklords. And again, as I say, I think that this book deserves more attention. It doesn't get a lot of attention because it is an independent publisher. If you don't read Previews magazine or follow in indie press, you don't tend to get exposed to this. I do try to encourage customers to read previews every time they come out. They come out once a month. You can get the big indie catalog for the cost of one issue of a comic, so it's cheap, and it's worth the investment. If you don't want to spend the money for that, at least take a look through it when you're in the store, and see what you think about some of these books that are in there. Because sometimes the only way you're ever going to hear about a book like this is through your own perusal of a catalog, because we don't always get enough copies of this in the store to put on the shelf. So by the time you come through the comic shop, the books are sold out already. And so there's or either that, or we get such a small number that's only for people who subscribe to it. There's just so many comics that come out every week that virtually no store can afford to stock everything enough to put on the shelf. So a title like Folklords, we've got maybe 5 or 6 subscribers at Buford store, and then we might get 8 copies total in the shipment. So that's 2 for the shelf. So the volume of customers is much larger than that. So by the time it's Thursday, if you come through on the weekend, all the copies might have already been bought, and that happens quite a lot. A lot of times, we get 1 copy of an independent book for the shelf, and it goes away on a Wednesday. So by the time weekend shoppers come through, they never see the book. So it really is worth your time to take a look at the previews as they come out, or even subscribe to previews and get it every month so that you can find out more about quality books that are coming out. But that's all I have to say about Folklords. Again, I could analyze the story more, but it would seem like I was just picking it apart, and I'm not really trying to do a literary criticism here. I'm just trying to let you know this is a cool book, and it is a book. Let's see, back to the title, right? is a comic that you probably aren't reading but should be. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll try to cobble together another one of these on another book soon. If you have any questions or comments about this book or anything you'd like me to discuss from the realm of indies or things that you have wondered about, let me know. I'll see if I have a copy in my collection and I can review it for you here, and so on and so forth. Thanks again. Until next time. Bye.